Welcome back to Painted Pages. In this episode, we present Chapter 3 of the Odyssey, which follows the spiritual journey of a woman as she discovers a universe much bigger than she could have ever imagined. Chapter 3. There are no coincidences. When we took the cable car back to the hotel, neither of us wanted to talk. We were busy with our thoughts. I was trying to convince myself how crazy it was to feel so much for a stranger, and I was too tired to start any kind of conversation to disturb Anne's silence. The early morning flight had taken its toll, leaving us drained. The moment we finally reached the hotel, we collapsed on our beds, utterly spent. Listening to Anne's breathing, I knew she had fallen asleep right away. As tired as I was, I couldn't help but think about him, the stranger. Every time I closed my eyes, his face appeared before me, peering at me intently, and each time I felt the same ache in my heart. Eventually, I surrendered to my exhaustion. I woke up from a deep slumber, feeling a surprising sense of peace. Despite the events at the Fisherman's Wharf, my mind had granted me a 2-hour rest. Thoughts of those eyes briefly crossed my mind, but the ache had subsided. His face now seemed like a fragment of a dream fading from my memory, and for that, I was grateful. I didn't want to dwell on the pain in my heart anymore. Anne was still sleeping in the next bed. I woke her up. We had only 45 minutes left to get ready for our reservation at the restaurant. Despite not feeling hungry, I couldn't contain my excitement for the live music. I headed to the bathroom to freshen up. Splashing cold water on my face brought a refreshing sensation, instantly revitalizing me. I swiftly slipped into my black strapless dress, fully prepared to embrace the exciting night that lay ahead. Anne was also in black pants and a black sleeveless button-down silk blouse. As soon as we'd grabbed our black coats, we were out the door. "We should have brought black sunglasses," I said, gazing at Anne. "We could be the female version of Men in Black." "Speaking of Men in Black, don't you think those men were a little weird?" Anne commented on the performers from Fisherman's Wharf. I was annoyed that she brought them up again when I had made every effort not to think about them. "They were the most beautiful creatures I've ever seen," I admitted, "and I don't want to talk about them right now. Even thinking of them raises my standards so high that I won't be able to find anyone for the rest of my life." Anne giggled. "Don't be so shallow. You don't know anything about them. As beautiful as they are, they could be jerks. And I'm telling you, there was something not right about those eyes. Besides, the way they were forming those images on the boards, I don't think is humanly possible." "Look who's talking," I snapped. "Jack wasn't the smartest or the nicest boy in school either." She gave me a dirty look in return, but didn't provide any response. I waved my hand to stop a taxi, which also ended the conversation. The timing was perfect. I didn't want to talk about what had happened in the afternoon. The restaurant seemed to be the right place to spend a Saturday evening. The live music hadn't started yet. We walked past a wide, crowded bar area with low, white sofas contrasting the dimmed light of the place. It was a little dark for my taste, though it was still nice ambiance. The dining tables started right where the bar area ended. Our table was close to the bar, not far from the stage where there would be live music starting in an hour. It could seat 4, but they sat us at the table anyway. A few minutes later, the waiter appeared at our side. A good-looking blonde man in his early 20s wearing a spiky, gravity-defying hairstyle and dressed all in black like the rest of the restaurant crew took our order for drinks and left. "Everything about this restaurant is perfect," Anne commented wickedly, meaning both our waiter and the ambiance. Classical music was playing in the background, somewhat hidden by the crowd chatter but loud enough to put me in a relaxed mood. What I had experienced that afternoon didn't feel real anymore, and my heartache was gone entirely. The moment our drinks arrived, Anne jerked back suddenly. "Oh my God!" she cried. "Holy shit!" she added, looking toward the bar. I turned my head to see what had surprised her so much. Even the waiter gave a curious glance. There he was. He stood right there by the bar with one of the other performers from the afternoon. I didn't think he would recognize me. The dimmed light made it hard to tell if he was looking at us or not. He wore a dark blazer and a white shirt with dark pants. In the dark, it was hard to see the colors of his suit, but he looked as appealing as before. The two started to walk in our direction. It didn't feel real. I turned around hastily and moved my gaze to Anne. I didn't dare look at the men directly anymore. I opened my eyes wide and stared at my girlfriend, trying to read her face to understand what was going on behind me. The only thing her expression gave away was how startled she too was to see the men in our restaurant. I waited for them to pass by our table and keep walking. My heart was beating so fast I thought I was having an anxiety attack. Instinctively, I turned my face to see them when I felt them come to a halt by our table. He leaned toward me.
"I hate to disturb your evening, but I hope you remember me from this afternoon,"
he said softly. His words startled me nonetheless. My hands trembled in my lap, feeling his gaze on me, with eyes glowing like a pair of beautiful dark gems. I couldn't make any sound. I was so afraid of the type of noise that could come out of my mouth. I could only manage to give him a weak smile. Anne jumped into the one-sided conversation to my rescue. "Yes, of course, we remember you. You two are the street performers from Fisherman's Wharf," she exclaimed excitedly. "What you did, your art, was incredible. We were, in fact, talking about your amazing performance on the way here." She wasn't giving away the whole truth, though she managed the situation much better than I did. I felt like a brainless moron, but I could tell she was also stressed out under the gaze of the two godlike strangers. He smiled at Anne.
"Your friend owes me a favor and I'm here to redeem it."
He winked at me teasingly. I knew exactly what he was talking about. He had found my ring.
"We didn't make a reservation here, and they're booked for the entire evening. When I saw you two ladies, I thought maybe you would return the favor. Would you mind if we joined your table for dinner tonight?"
He smiled at Anne angelically.
"It will be on us, of course,"
he added. I glanced at Anne. She was dazzled. Her mouth was literally open. I didn't think she comprehended what he was talking about. Leaning across the table, avoiding any eye contact with the two men standing right by me, I whispered to Anne, reminding her that he had found my grandmother's ring as if it were something he wasn't supposed to hear. I felt even more pathetic. Anne somehow pulled herself together. "No, we wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind if Laura's okay with it. We can share the table, but it's not necessary to pay for our dinner. We appreciate the offer, though," she managed to say. They all looked at me for confirmation. I nodded at Anne, still avoiding looking at the two men with the piercing eyes.
"I'm Azur, and this is my brother Arnis."
He introduced them. He sat at my left side, and his brother sat across from him on my right at the square table. "I'm Anne, and this is my best friend and almost sister, Laura," Anne replied warmly. It was an uncomfortable moment. Thankfully, the server arrived right away, putting extra silverware and plates on the table. A huge knot clogged my stomach. I didn't feel like eating anymore and hadn't had time to look at the menu. Anne must have felt the same way. She asked the server for a little more time until Azur and Arnis decided what they wanted. The server also seemed to be carried away by their beauty. He took extra time to explain the wine list on the menu and suggested a few, but the men only wanted water. Arnis started the conversation this time.
"I apologize on behalf of my brother. It was his idea, and he dragged me along. I'm sure you had some special evening planned for tonight without two strangers intruding."
Arnis's voice was comforting. It gave me the courage to carry on the conversation, and I made my first coherent comment. "We don't mind at all. It's such a big coincidence, though." I was relieved to show a trace of intelligence this time.
"I don't believe in coincidences."
Azur joined the conversation. I instinctively looked his way. It was a mistake. His eyes were on me, and I got trapped in them again. But this time, I gave in. I wouldn't be able to avoid him all evening anyway. His eyes weren't as bright as they had seemed in the afternoon, as it was darker in the restaurant. Nevertheless, they were still mesmerizing. Once again, I dove deeply into the lake, but I didn't feel I was drowning. Instead, I was nourished by the deep water. I leaned toward him to take a closer look at them. He didn't flinch, as if he were expecting my reaction. "Your eyes," I said. "They're beautiful. I can almost see your soul." The instant the words spilled from my mouth, I was shocked. It wasn't in my nature to speak to a stranger in that manner. I was pretty sure I was possessed by some unseen forces. I looked at Anne. She was blushing. She was embarrassed for me, and I was embarrassed for myself. I cleared my throat and directed my attention to the wine glass I held, but I kept talking. "You all have the same eye color. I assume the other performer from this afternoon is also your brother, right?" I mumbled and gathered a little courage to look up at him again. He was a gentleman. He didn't show any sign of amusement, but gave me a warm smile and confirmed.
Yes, he is. He couldn't join us tonight. Glad he didn't. We wouldn't be able to fit at the table.
He smiled again.
And thank you for your compliment.
I felt the heat coming through my cheeks. I took another sip of my wine. Thankfully, Anne joined the conversation, saving me from his intense gaze. I spoke to him after the performance. If I'm not mistaken, his name is Melquiades. What an unusual name. Azur nodded.
Yes, you remember it right. His name is Melquiades.
Before he explained any further, our server arrived the second time for our orders. I still wasn't ready, but I quickly selected steak salad. Azur and Arnes ordered the same vegetarian dish, and Anne went with the seafood pasta. "What you did at the park this afternoon was unbelievable," said Anne after the server left. "I didn't think anybody could do such a thing."
It is something we learned from our parents growing up.
Arnes explained as if it wasn't a big deal. "Is that what you do for a living?" I asked curiously.
No, we don't. We have a family business. We do this only when we travel and for fun. The money we've made today would hardly cover this dinner.
Azur answered in an uncomfortable tone. "You know you could do this professionally," Anne suggested.
We'd rather do it for fun.
I wasn't satisfied with Azur's reply. Why do you even bother? If they already had a business, and if they didn't want to pursue this as a career path, to me, it was only a waste of time.
Because we love to connect with people on the street, especially when they least expect it. Sometimes you can bring out the best in people in those small moments and make them believe that they can do anything in life.
Azur looked at me as if it was the most obvious explanation behind their performance.
What we do seems to be impossible to achieve, but in fact, anybody can learn with a little concentration and practice.
Arnes explained a little more.
When people see us perform, they realize that there is no limit to their imaginations. We're raising their consciousness by displaying the extraordinary right before their eyes. Deep inside, they know there are no boundaries to what a human can create. We help them remember it.
They were proud of their work and knew how impressive their performance was. Annoyance washed over me as I listened to them talk. I was disturbed by their faith in humanity. How naive they were to think they could raise the consciousness of humanity with a simple street display, no matter how remarkable it was. I wanted to change the subject. "So, what do you do for a living then?" I asked again, targeting Arnes with my question. I wasn't ready to interrogate Azur yet. Anne gave me a dirty look. She was right. I had no business questioning them, but couldn't help myself. Arnes stayed silent.
Family business.
Azur repeated, avoiding my question.
Right now we're on vacation, traveling around the US, enjoying our time.
He was again looking directly at me. He didn't answer my question, but I was having difficulty focusing on what he said when I was the center of his attention.
What about you ladies? Are you from San Francisco?
Arnes asked, looking at Anne. I was grateful that I didn't have to look at Azur anymore. I turned my head toward Anne and Arnes to listen to the conversation, but I could feel Azur's eyes were still on me. It felt solid. I didn't know what to do with my hands, so I put them in my lap to avoid anything embarrassing. We're from Atlanta. Lara is here for business, and she was nice enough to bring me along so we could spend some time together. I'm married with 2 kids. She was playing with her ring. I needed a break, she shyly admitted. It was a relief to confess that she was married. She loved Jack and didn't want to give these men the wrong impression. Our waiter arrived with our orders. With Azur watching me from where he sat, I had lost my appetite, but I welcomed the food. It was a distraction from his nearness. I hoped he could also keep himself busy and release me from his attention. Arnes and Azur held their hands up towards their plate for a second before they started. "Did you just pray?" I asked curiously. My mom used to do that, but she would say a short prayer. This felt different.
We've thanked the food.
Azur answered. "You mean, thanked God for the food?" I corrected him. He shrugged his shoulders.
If you believe that God is everywhere and in everything, then it should also be part of this food. So, the answer to your question is yes, we've thanked God too.
And he took his first bite. "Interesting," I said. "I don't think the cow on my plate would care to be appreciated after what he's gone through." I laughed at my joke, but nobody else did. "Well, I don't want to get into a personal relationship with the meat and vegetables on my plate, let alone see them as part of God," I mumbled to myself, worried I overreacted to their little ceremony more than necessary.
You shouldn't do anything if it doesn't feel right for you.
He gave me a beautiful smile, reached for my hand, and squeezed gently. My chest began to tighten. I didn't know why I became so emotional suddenly. He didn't let my hand go, but my heartache was painful. I pulled my hand away slowly, took a deep breath, and looked him in the eye. "You're right, I shouldn't," I said. "Are you a missionary?" Anne, too, was taken aback by his answer.
No, I'm not. I've never been part of any organized religion or belief system. But I do believe in one creator, or one source who is part of everything, and everything it is part of deserves to be thanked every now and then.
He explained himself briefly and took another bite of his salad. I was startled when the live music started. A beautiful black woman was singing, "Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow?" I had always loved Amy Winehouse's version of the song, and the woman sounded exactly like her. "Tonight you're mine completely. You give your love so sweetly. Tonight the light of love is in your eyes."
Will you still love me tomorrow?
"Will you still love me tomorrow?" The emotions were pouring out of me. The woman was singing it from the heart. I didn't want to cry, so I stopped breathing for a few seconds to stop the tears from flowing. As soon as the song was over, Azur leaned toward me and whispered,
Do you have any plans for tomorrow?
"Will you still love me tomorrow?" I repeated the lyrics in my head for a reason I did not know. A strange feeling rose to my throat, a sort of sadness preventing me from answering. His expectant stare made me weary. I was not ready for his question. I murmured a few unintelligible words, but nothing that came out made sense. We didn't have specific plans for Sunday. Anne and I had talked about taking another city tour, but we hadn't agreed on it yet, and I didn't know if my heart could take seeing him again. I looked up at Anne for rescue. She was already lost in the next song, wasn't even aware of my trouble. "Why do you want to know?" I finally gave up.
I want to see you again.
I can't leave Anne alone.
My other brother, Malquides, won't be joining us, but 4 of us can still hang out.
I don't think Anne would appreciate a double date, you know. She's married.
Trust me, Arnis has no interest in her the way you think. He has other commitments. Your friend will be safe with him.
What about you? Why do you want to see me? Don't you have other commitments?
No, I'm here for you. If you let me in.
I tried to ignore Azur for the rest of the night. The music was loud and powerful, and none of us felt like talking anymore. Azur asked for my phone number right before we were ready to leave. He assured me he would call early in the morning to make plans. I couldn't give him any promises before I'd had a chance to talk to Anne. They walked us outside and waited until we got a taxi. "How did he know you have issues?" Anne teased me in the hotel room when I told her about the conversation I'd had with Azur. I knew she was trying to make me acknowledge my problems and have me work on them. "You've got such thick walls around you, Laura. As much as I envy your freedom, I don't want you to spend the rest of your life alone. You need to find a balance." He must be very intuitive to make such a comment. "Do you want to see them again tomorrow?" I asked, ignoring her statement, hoping the answer would be no. "You shouldn't have let him take the check," Anne remarked, raising an eyebrow. "We owe him a favor again." Her words and the sinister smile that appeared on her face surprised me. I thought she wouldn't like spending another day with them. I was wrong. "I didn't let him. He was like a hawk. I didn't even realize he had already paid it. Did you? She giggled. Me neither. We don't know them. Just because they're gorgeous doesn't mean they're good people. You said they could be jerks. I found myself trying to convince Anne not to go out with them. No, it doesn't, Anne agreed. But they seem to be extremely nice. I was wrong. They're not jerks at all. I can't imagine any harm would come from being with them. At least my instinct tells me they're safe. With a restless night of tossing and turning and constant chatter relentlessly invading my mind, I might have dozed off just a few hours before the break of dawn. The only reason I was awake was the 3-hour time difference. My internal clock demanded that I get up. Nevertheless, I was abruptly jolted by the insistent ringing of my phone at 7:30 in the morning. I knew who it was, but that didn't help my rising heartbeat when I answered it.
Good morning, Lara.
His voice pierced through my ear like it was my college years all over again. I hadn't felt so weak since my troubled boyfriend, David. Azur apologized for calling early, but he didn't want to miss the opportunity to have breakfast with us. He suggested wearing something comfortable and warm. My voice came out hoarse. It was such a big contrast to his soothing tone. My responses were short and direct, but I did agree that they could pick us up from the hotel in half an hour. Anne was in much better shape. She was already showered and nearly ready to leave. Are you sure you want to do this? I asked Anne. I can call him back and cancel it. I'm absolutely sure. Her scrutinizing gaze met mine. I knew exactly what she was thinking. I was looking for an excuse to bail on him. She was right. I sighed. Wear something comfortable and warm, I said before I headed for the bathroom. It took me less than 10 minutes to get out of the shower. Rushing into the small bedroom like a headless chicken, I dug in my suitcase to find the proper clothing for the weather outside. After creating a pile of clothes on my bed, I finally settled on blue jeans, a white sweater, and a white denim jacket. All too aware of the fact that they were probably not warm enough to protect me from the winds outside. But I didn't have many options to select from. Besides, life presented more pressing matters. I was so stressed about meeting Azur again that I didn't care if I froze to death. My hair was damp when I received the second phone call that they were in the lobby waiting for us. My chest hurting from my strong heartbeats, I tried to keep my voice steady and managed to tell him we would be down in a few minutes. Even though I expected to be stunned and thought I was prepared, I still had a hard time grasping reality when I saw them. They were both sitting in chairs in the busy reception area. As soon as they saw us, they stood. Their existence filled the entire lobby. Everybody was affected by their presence. All eyes were on them. Their impact hadn't been as apparent at the restaurant. Maybe the ambiance, the music, and the dim light camouflaged it. It wasn't simply about their beauty, but was also due to the radiant energy they were emitting. It was breathtaking and shocking at the same time. I didn't think I would ever become accustomed to it. Arnis greeted me first and hugged me. When I moved on to Azur, I was hesitant and didn't know what to do. He hugged me also, and I was lost in his arms. He lightly kissed me on my cheek, which gave me almost a solid, tingling sensation.
Your hair is wet.
He said with concern, running his fingers through the damp tendrils of my hair to prove he was right.
You should have dried it before you left the room. It's a bit cold today.
I was taken aback by the intimacy of his act. I recoiled instinctively to get away from his fingers in my hair. You only gave me half an hour to get ready. My voice came out a little harsher than I intended. I didn't mean to snap, but I was annoyed by his confidence when I was highly self-conscious and stressed. I awkwardly pulled a wet lock of hair that had been falling on my face behind my ear.
You could have asked for more time.
He said thoughtfully, stepping back to give me more space, and slid his hands into his pockets. I stayed silent. The truth was, as much as I denied myself and thought I was ready to ditch him, I didn't want to wait for another minute to see him again.
Shall we?
Arnis glanced down toward the revolving doors at the entrance of the hotel, facing the busy street. It was time to leave. We all nodded quietly and headed for the exit. The sections of the revolving door were wide enough to accommodate more than one person. Azur jumped into the same platform with me, ignoring the confused look on my face, and wrapped his arms around my shoulders.
We need to keep you warm.
He said, ushering me outside to get a taxi. Maybe it was his genuine smile or his worry about my health, or I simply wanted to be close to him, but I didn't flinch from his touch this time. Despite Anne's mocking smirk, I let him hold me in his arms until the taxi pulled over. He sat with Anne and me in the back, but thankfully kept his arms to himself. We arrived at a small breakfast place in Sausalito, a beautiful Mediterranean-style village with hillside homes on the other end of the Golden Gate Bridge. The restaurant had a view of the bridge and the rest of the town. It was a pity that we had to sit inside as it was pretty windy outside. We sat close to the window. I felt much better when I had some coffee and chocolate pancakes in my system. I wasn't as grumpy anymore. "Where are you originally from? You all have very unusual names," I asked. I'd been wondering about this since last night, but had never had the chance to receive any answers from them.
I honestly feel like we don't belong to any specific place.
Arnis answered.
Our parents traveled a lot, and growing up, we never stayed in one spot for more than a year. We've lived abroad for most of our lives. I guess our parents were wise to give us unusual names so we would belong everywhere.
He added. Or nowhere. I blurted out, not filtering myself. Lara was my middle name. I didn't want to use my first name, Fatma. It came from my father's side and made me feel like an outsider. I wanted to fit in. But more than that, ignoring it was my defiance, a statement that I was not related to his side of the family.
I hope you weren't thinking about taking a regular city tour today, were you?
Azur interrupted Arnis and me, changing the subject again.
You can do that later today or during the week, when we won't be there to bother you. We're leaving later in the afternoon.
His words shouldn't have had any effect on me. I needed my space. I looked down, wanting to avoid his scrutiny. I didn't need to see him again. Did I? He made me feel so weak and out of control. But suddenly, I felt a knot in my throat. I was heartbroken. I felt abandoned. He looked at me as if he sensed what I was thinking.
I'm planning to visit Atlanta next week. I would love to see you,
he said. He didn't take his eyes off me, probably trying to read my emotions. Blood rushed to my head, and extreme joy followed. I was dizzy. It didn't last long, though. The joy was replaced by a wave of panic. I knew so little about this man, but looking into his eyes and feeling his soul, I knew I could fall for him, and I didn't think I could afford it. "What's the occasion?" I asked, pretending I was indifferent to his comment. I hoped I wasn't the only reason for him to visit Atlanta so that I could find an excuse not to see him.
Business,
he said casually. "Are you traveling with your brothers?"
No, they'll continue on their trip. I'll be the only one and definitely need company while I'm there.
He inclined his head, his gaze flickering over my face, measuring my reaction, I could tell. I smiled at him. "Yes, sure, call me," I said lamely, averting my gaze to my plate. My smile probably didn't reach my eyes. "So what's the plan today?" Anne asked abruptly, sensing my discomfort on the subject.
We'll take you to Ocean Beach.
Arnis answered. "I love the beach." Anne's eyes gleamed with genuine excitement. Since we had moved to Atlanta, we had realized how much we took living in Florida, by the bay, next to a beach, for granted. The landscape was beautiful in Atlanta. Everywhere you went was green, but it never replaced our longing for a beautiful sandy beach.
It might not be what you think of when you think of hanging out at the beach. It can be foggy sometimes and feel quite chilly, but it is magical. You're going to love it. There are cafes and restaurants around the area, so we can keep ourselves warm if we have to.
Arnis commented. The beach wasn't far away. We got there in half an hour. It was a quiet trip, but beautiful. Anne was busy looking outside, enjoying the scenery. Neither Azur nor Arnis spoke much, aside from a few comments about our drive. I couldn't pay much attention to the road, though, as I was busy with my thoughts. The reason I had wanted to see San Francisco so much was my mom. It had been, in fact, her favorite city. She visited it before she met my dad. She fell madly in love with the city and with one particular boy she met there. Long-distance relationships never work out, she told me. After 6 months of mailing the old-fashioned way that involved stamps and envelopes, along with occasional phone calls, their relationship came to an end. But I think my mom always had the question, what if, in the corner of her mind? What if she had ended up with him, not my dad? She and I had plans to see the city together someday, and once we came very close. She had saved enough money so both of us could make the trip, but we ended up taking an Alaskan cruise instead. A friend of hers had somehow convinced her to see Alaska. We were supposed to have plenty of time to see San Francisco, so we changed our trip plans to take the cruise, but we never had a chance to take another trip together. She mentioned that her boyfriend took her to a beach when they were in California, and I wondered if the brothers were taking us to the same beach. I asked Azur if there were others around the area. He said there were a few of them. I shifted my gaze to the road disappointedly and kept quiet the rest of the ride. The fog enveloping the beach seemed like it was coming from another dimension and time. It was cold outside, but I took my shoes off to feel every grain of wet sand between my toes anyway. Watching the surfers, listening to the sounds of waves crashing on the beach, and walking in the sand worked its magic. It took me to a state where I was no longer sad, nervous, or anxious. I stopped thinking of my mom and worrying about the stranger walking next to me. For a few minutes, there was only the sea, the sand, and my toes. I was happy. It was near 11 o'clock. The sun was bright, but not strong enough to warm us, and it felt chilly after we'd walked on the sand for some time. Anne wanted to go into a cafe by the pier that we were passing. Arnis and I agreed, and we automatically followed her. I didn't want to stay alone with Azur. I didn't think I could handle it. I was surprised when Azur took hold of my arm.
Please walk with me.
He stared at me with questioning eyes that I had done everything in my power to avoid so far. I thought we were going into the cafe. I'm cold. My voice trembled, not only because it was cold, but also at the idea that he wanted me to stay.
I want to talk to you.
He claimed. He took his jacket off and offered it to me. It was a dark gray knitted jacket. It looked big and snuggly. It was hard to resist, but he had on only a plain red short-sleeved t-shirt underneath. I didn't want to take it. You'll be freezing if you give me yours.
It is all in the mind, trust me, I won't be cold. Seeing you shivering upsets me more. Please take it.
I reluctantly put it on. I had to pull up the sleeves. I relaxed into its warmth, but my calm didn't last long. Another kind of shiver went through me when he reached to hold my hand. An intense electrical current that perplexed me passed from his body to mine. I thought about pulling from his touch, but the urge of surrendering to him was irresistible. It felt right. He laughed at my reaction.
I know it is not the cold this time.
He said arrogantly. I blushed. His hand was warm. He didn't show any sign of being cold. We started walking again.
Are you not going to ask me questions?
He started. Why should I ask you any questions? You're the one who wanted to talk to me, I said, in an uncomfortable tone to imply he was wrong. The truth was, I did have many questions for him, but it unnerved me and made me angry that he could read me like an open book.
I know I'm not an ordinary man you would meet every day. I thought you might be curious.
I couldn't believe my ears. How arrogant he was. Why do you think you're not ordinary? My voice came out harsh. He thought he was better than everybody else. He stopped walking, pulling me to a stop too, and turned to face me.
If I were, you wouldn't have agreed to see me today.
His eyes met mine. I bit my lower lip, trying to prevent myself from saying something I would regret later. He was right. It wasn't only his good looks that I was attracted to. Under different circumstances, I would have been repelled by his looks, as I found him intimidating. There was something else, probably his talent and his perspective on life, that I couldn't resist. But all these qualities in him made him even more repelling and bothered the hell out of me.
Don't you agree?
His question was the last straw. Okay, you've asked for it, I burst at last. I pulled my hand free from his. Why are you interested in me, Azur? I mean, look at you, I said in an accusing tone. What are you doing here with me? And you're planning to come to Atlanta to see me again, I continued in disbelief. He stood there and looked at me unfazed, as if my words didn't mean anything to him, which drove me more insane. If you're after something else, there are plenty of women out there who wouldn't mind throwing themselves at your feet. Don't bother to waste your time with me. I've got nothing I can offer you. I was angry with him, though he hadn't done anything wrong. In fact, he'd been a perfect gentleman. He sighed. He no longer seemed as relaxed. He was struggling to find the right words. Finally, he said the most absurd thing.
Would you believe me if I told you that this was our agreement? That we agreed to be together at this moment, so I could tell you that I'm here to help you?
What I was thinking must have been obvious by the look on my face. He didn't make any sense, and I was about to turn my back and leave him right there. He reached out to hold my hand to keep me from walking away.
I'll show you something. Please give me a chance.
He pleaded. I hesitated for a second, but finally I nodded.
Wait here for a second, please.
I breathed deeply and nodded again. He turned to the sea and walked closer to the water. Avoiding the crashing waves, he carefully took a handful of seawater and came back cautiously in order not to spill the liquid in his hands. He squatted down by my feet and gently spread the water on the sand. I was expecting the water drops to be absorbed by the sand right away, but they weren't. Instead, they stayed as if they were on a hard, solid surface. To my surprise, the water drops merged slowly and made one larger drop that looked smooth and glossy. Azur stayed on one knee, and his eyes were on me. I bent down to take a closer look. Everything happened so quickly. The water drop changed form into the shape of a face. It was so sudden, and I think it was my face. I jerked back and let out a low scream. As soon as I screamed, the strange figure was absorbed by the sand. "What the fuck?" I gasped, looking at him in shock. "How did you do this?" I didn't know what else to say or how to react. The brothers did put on a show that was quite remarkable at Fisherman's Wharf, but this was different. This was out of this world.
I'm sorry.
He said, standing up.
I didn't mean to frighten you, but this seems to be the only way to show you that there is more to this life than you can think of.
I knew those gem-like eyes couldn't be real. "What are you?" I asked in astonishment.
It is complicated, Lara. I'd rather have this conversation with you next week. My brothers and I have a limited time here in San Francisco.
He held my hand and rested it on his chest. I could feel his heart beating.
I promise, when I come to Atlanta to visit you, I'll explain everything.
You can't just do a magic trick and leave me hanging. You're leaving me with more questions than answers. Either you give me an explanation now, or don't even bother to call me. I raised my voice, retrieving my hand from his. However, I knew there wouldn't be an explanation for what I had witnessed. An explanation that would make sense, or that I could comprehend. I turned my back hastily and rushed towards the cafe to get Anne. I was worried for her, wondering if Arnis was giving her any trouble. Azur caught up with me, holding my arm again to stop me from running away.
I'm here to help you, Lara. Don't you see I can control elements? You saw that yesterday, along with a bunch of other people, and you saw it here. I'm not any human or any man.
I could see the agony in his angelic eyes. He was in pain because of me. Feelings of guilt ran through me. I couldn't even explain to myself what I was feeling guilty for. I see that, I admitted, which worries me even more, I said in a low voice. I knew how to deal with an ordinary man, but I didn't know how to deal with him.
I don't mean any harm to you or to trick you. All I want is for you to trust me. I want to help you.
Help me what? I asked, confused. I don't need any help. I'm perfectly fine.
Listen, please. You don't remember any of it, but I promised you I'd be here for you. I promised you a long time ago. You just don't remember any of it. Please trust me. I will explain everything in Atlanta.
None of his words made any sense, but his eyes were screaming for my trust and understanding. How could I turn my back on an angel? Why couldn't you wait until you see me in Atlanta then? I said. Why did you have to do this now? Can't you see how difficult it is for me to wait for another week to find out what all this is about? I don't think my heart can take it for another week. He looked relieved when he realized I was still considering seeing him again.
Because I know you so well.
He released my arm.
If I hadn't given you something to think about, you wouldn't want to see me in Atlanta. I know you have a self-destructive personality. You don't trust anyone, and you don't trust yourself. The minute you realize you have feelings for me, you'll cut me out of your life. When I told you I could come to Atlanta to see you, I could tell you were already thinking of how to avoid me. I also happen to know that you have a curious personality. You won't let me go until you find out what I am.
You're right, I won't, I admitted.
I would love to stay here with you in San Francisco and explain everything, but I need at least a few days to do that. And right now, everything I say to you will cause nothing but more confusion. I can't do this in a few hours. My brothers and I have business to take care of. We must leave, and you need your time with Anne and your work. You won't get to see me until next week, but until then, please have some faith.
I must have been having one of my dreams. I hoped I would wake up. My gaze went to the waves crashing on the beach, but it wasn't a dream because I wasn't drowning in the dark water. Okay, I whispered, deciding to take a chance on him. I'll see you next week.
Please do not mention anything to Anne about our conversation. It will not help her, but it will worry her. I don't think she needs that in her life right now. Once you find out everything about me, it will be up to you,
he said. Did you follow me here to San Francisco? I couldn't help but ask.
No, I didn't. I knew we would meet someday, somewhere, and I guess the universe planned for this to be the time.
He raised his hand and stroked the side of my face. Why couldn't it plan to be in Atlanta then, since you're coming anyway? I think the universe hates me, I said, in disbelief at myself on how much I wanted to see him again.
Because I hadn't really planned to come to Atlanta before,
he confessed as we approached the cafe. We found Arnis and Anne in a deep conversation. Anne seemed to be upset, and as soon as she saw us, she wiped her eyes. What is wrong with you people? I berated Arnis. Why the hell did you make her cry? Anne started laughing. He's fine, Lara. I was the one boring him with my problems. I didn't know you have problems. I was offended by her comment. She was talking about her problems to a stranger, and I hadn't heard anything about them. Stay tuned for Chapter 4 and more beautiful artwork. Please remember to like our videos and subscribe to our channel.